What's up guys, welcome back to my channel Anime Fiction. I'm back with a new episode of What If Naruto Was the King of Chaos Part 5. And if you did enjoy the video, give this a like, and if you're new to my channel and like my content, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more crossover fictions. Now let's begin this new video.
Chapter 19. Naruto's Point of View. The waitress was considerably smaller than the anime version. If I were to guess, using my understanding from Earth, the actual Seer Flova would be around 10 years old right now, so a little more than a year my senior. There would be no reason for the girl to be here in the hostess right now other than the possibility, or the fact that she had previously met Freya and exchanged forms. So Horn was the true seer at the time, potentially posing as the goddess of war and beauty back where Freya spent her time. And Freya herself appeared in the guise of a young girl in front of me. Seer looked just like the teenager version of herself, except she had more baby fat and was shorter than even I. I never understood why the raucous tavern owner, Mia Grand, let the strange goddess act like this. One would expect that someone who left a familia to live a normal life would do everything in their power to stay out of it, let alone allow their goddess to continue with her antics. To everyone his or her own, I suppose. Chaos's behavior towards gods convinced me that it was the goddess standing before me. I'd had encounters with Hamura and some of Valerin's minor gods, as well as Loki. When there was a holy presence present, Chaos tensed even more, as if to protect me if necessary. I assumed a deity was considerably more dangerous than any monster or mortal, regardless of whether their arcanum was sealed. Then there was the fact that Chaos vision permitted me to see straight through Freya's magical disguise, revealing the obsessive gleam in her true eye. The feeling I'd experienced in the manor, like someone was watching at me from somewhere I didn't know, had returned in full force and was now more forceful than ever. After Hamura cast hunter demons on me for training practice, I got a sixth sense that told me I was being watched. So this was Belle's reaction to her sight. It's very obtrusive, I thought solemnly. I've never seen you before here. Are you a new member of the Loki familia? Seer inquired, a bright smile on her face. She had a round tray held up to her chest, most likely from serving drinks. Yes, I am. I answered nonchalantly, trying not to let my mistrust show in my voice. She gave herself a self-congratulatory murmur, nodding her head. I assumed so. You see, the Loki familia are regulars here, and the execs have never brought you before. So I figured you were a new member and was correct. She spoke like a child, pleased of herself for connecting such obvious dots so simply. I had to compliment her on her acting abilities. Finn, Reveria, and Gareth were nodding in agreement, but I simply stared at the young girl emotionlessly. But for a split second, I thought I saw something in her eyes, like a guarded look. I dismissed it as her being caught off guard by the unexpected talk. She also shifted closer to me for some reason, most likely to defend me from any unexpected attack. She'd become something of a bodyguard for me until I healed, and given Sir's sudden talk, she was probably immediately pushed closer to guard me. But that was just my opinion. Something in my stomach was telling me otherwise, but I couldn't put my finger on it. You're quite clever, aren't you? Seer laughed when I stated this. But you know, clever people also make sure to introduce themselves as well. She gave me a pout, and the elder members of my group gave me a disapproving glance. Loki just grinned at me and sipped the drink that had gotten to her before everyone else. I simply ignored them in favor of this discussion. That was just mean. I was about to tell you something. Sir continued, her frown still on her face. I apologize. You just caught me off guard, I said with a smile. She narrowed her eyes even more and puffed up her cheeks before sighing and smiling again. Shu tucked the dish under her arm and reached for her chest with her free hand. Hello, my name is Seer Flova. I work as a waiter at the Hostess of Fertility. I'm available to serve you whenever you need me, she said it a little dramatically. I rolled my eyes beneath the blindfold before gesticulating at myself. Cheel, Naruto. Naruto is what my buddies call me. Naruto Uzumaki? She murmured this while tapping her chin and glancing up. A strange name. Courtesy of my late parents. I replied coldly. My condolences. She said this while bowing slightly. Meh. Don't be concerned. There was never any love there in the first place. I passed it off by shaking my hand. Reveria, who was behind me, gave me a troubled glance that I couldn't see. Still though. The nickname, Naruto, doesn't exactly give you a most honest image either. Seer continued, her gaze fixed on me. I shrugged and raised my hands. I know what my nickname is called. But in this life, we don't get to choose our names. So I'm stuck with that name unless I change my identity, which is a little late. Can I call you Naruto then? Leaning forward, she inquired. If you like. I don't mind at all. I responded. She satisfiedly nodded and straightened her back again. Then it's Naruto. I hope we can become friends. She said this while extending out her hand. I made a handshake with it. I was worried Freya was aware of my existence. After all, there was no way of knowing if she could see chaos inside my soul. I wasn't sure I could hide chaos from that particular eyesight of hers. And, knowing her, she'd be pining for me to become a member of her familia. After all, she was a collector of unique items, and unique would be an understatement when describing chaos. But if I didn't allow her to observe me in this way, I wouldn't know what other tactics she would employ. In this way, I could be conscious of her, but I doubted I was finished with her. It had most likely only just begun with the insane goddess. One thing I did notice was that her gaze kept returning to Excalibur in my hand. But before I could think about why, she said again. Pardon me if I'm being insensitive, but are you truly blind? You're wearing blindfolds and carrying a walking stick. Are you certain you're an adventurer?
I'm blind in the sense that I don't see in the way other people see. Mysteriously, I said.
No? No, I see things in different ways. Because I can still see monsters, I can work as an explorer.
She merely stated, I see. My Naruto is amazing. Loki, flushed and inebriated, said as she lunged over the table to grasp me. She drew me into a tight hug, the rest of her body splayed across the table. Riveria grumbled and snapped her tongue.
He is? Seer inquired. Loki's rantings made the tavern a little quieter. I assumed everything had already been quiet due to our presence, but it was now nearly pin-drop silent. Oh yes, Loki exclaimed. He gained a level today. Are you kidding me? He killed Goliath on his first day in the dungeon and subsequently advanced to level 2. She exclaimed as she pressed her cheek ferociously against mine. The rest of the patrons in the tavern grew silent. As her comments resonated through the room, they looked at each other in full amazement and bewilderment. I was almost tempted to curse her right there and then. Her eagerness had already cost me the opportunity to max out my numbers as much as possible, and now she'd gone and blabbed it out for the entire world to hear before we could notify the guild.
Sir stood there dumbfounded, just watching Loki chuckle drunkenly while treating me like a teddy bear. She gulped before glancing at the executives with suspicion. They nodded silently in response to her question. Why would they not? According to them, it would have to be revealed to the public anyhow.
That modest action from them seems to persuade a sizable part of the clients. I could see Mia at the counter preparing to serve someone a plate, but her hand was stuck in midair, gawking at us before drawing an expression of acceptance across her face.
I couldn't envision many people challenging the words of a high-ranking familia like ours. Sir swallowed again before turning to face me. But I could see Freya's ravenous expression via Chaos's eyes. I trembled slightly as I realized that any prospect of that stalker losing interest in me was over. I didn't need that kind of attention right now. Not to mention the scary expression in her eye.
Is that true? Seer exhaled deeply. I nodded and sighed. Yeah. On my first run today, I went down to the middle floors under the supervision of Miss Riveria. In addition, Goliath spawned on top of us, trapping us and leaving us with no way out. So we had to fight it, and I eventually killed it. That's all there is to it. Didn't you team up with 9 Hell and kill the beast? Someone on the table across from us yelled. I turned to face him and immediately recognized the filthy vagabond. It was the same tiny dog who made fun of me when I tried out for the familia the day before. In his intoxication and wrath, his face was flushed, particularly his nose. Nope. I responded calmly. I did it all by myself, and it helped me advance. Bullshit. He yelled and jumped out of his seat. The chair collapsed, making a clattering noise that grabbed Mamma Mia's attention, along with his outburst. I noticed her going to chastise him and quickly thrust my hand in her direction. Mia was taken aback by the rapid movement, as well as the seemingly strange action for a blind boy who was turned in her direction despite the fact that he was not supposed to be able to see her. The drinker tensed when he saw her going to yell, but relaxed when she didn't. Before she could address me, I moved from her to him, recapturing his gaze. Why don't we talk about it? First and foremost, what is your name? In general, the beefy alcoholic sniffed and jabbed his finger in his chest. Hello, My name is Moore. And I recall you vividly, you snotty brat.
Naruto rolled his eyes and spun completely about in his stool to face him.
And where exactly do you remember me from, Mr. Moore? Moore spit on his face. How did I remember you? Are you having fun with me? I was present when you tried out for the Loki Familia, thus I know you only recently joined. Despite this, you claim to have progressed since then. Do you really expect me to believe that? Naruto arched his brow. What's so difficult to believe? Mind you, the executives are backing up my goddess's allegation, so does that not make it true? High standing does not stop people from lying. Moore yelled as a number of men mumbled in agreement behind him. Finn averted his gaze from them. Are you openly accusing us of lying, Mr. Moore? Palom inquired gently. Moore paused for a time as his drunken stupor subsided enough for him to realize he'd just made an accusation against a high-ranking adventurer. But the intoxication still had a hold on him, and he couldn't hold back his rage. And what about you? He told Finn. We are experienced adventurers who applied to your familia and have results to show for it. Despite this, you kicked me out and just let this youngster join you. A weakling blind brat that demonstrates no strength. Why? Did you not just hear about Naruto's achievements? Reveria stated calmly. I saw Naruto emerge unscathed from Hellhound Fire, tearing off a Minotaur's head with ease, and then beheading and cleaving Goliath down the middle. Is my word not enough to persuade you?
No, because for some reason, you're all over him despite the fact that he clearly has nothing to offer. Why are you fabricating stories on his behalf?
When Naruto raised his palms, a purple glow shone from them. The light left his palms and developed into some sort of magical mist before collapsing into a massive item on the floor. Everyone recognized the Goliath tooth, the Monster Rex drop item that sparkled with an ivory light. Storage magic? He actually has the tooth. Does that not mean he killed it after all? I'm not sure, fellas. This point has somewhat persuaded me. Just look at their expressions.
All of the patrons in the tavern looked at the Loki Familia's combined faces. Their expressions were hardened in wordless rage. Naruto hadn't been with them long, but a disrespect to his achievements was an affront to their reputation.
Not to mention that the Moors freely admitted to being liars and fabricating a tale. Loki appeared to be the most enraged, as her expression was wrapped up in a possessive and righteous fury that removed the blush of her drunkenness and made her grip Naruto harder. Seer moved away from the discourse and into the background. She didn't want to be a part of this fight because she already had almost all of the information she needed, but she was curious to see how things played out. Moore was worrying in the back of his head as he realized he had crossed a line that would be tough to walk back over. His pride and wrath, however, were too great for him to back down. So, he has the tooth. How do we know you didn't cause the majority of the damage and then let him finish it off? The beast wouldn't do you any good, but I'm sure it provided him something tasty. Reveria, he said. So you do believe that he is a level 2 now, do you? She inquired quietly. No. Yes. Perhaps with the Excelia he acquired at level 1. But I don't believe he achieved it on his own. He was simply riding on your efforts. That's exactly what happened. Moore said this while pointing at them. Finn seems to have had about enough of this man's pranks. He motioned at Naruto, then to the tooth. Naruto nodded, and the tooth vanished. Finn's then turned his attention to Moore. Mr. Moore, please. Please tell me something. What made you want to join our familia? He inquired. The Moors grunted. Because I thought that by joining you, I might finally be able to level up from 1. Really? Yes. Everyone knows how the doll princess leveled up in a year. That I can accept, but I refuse to accept that this brat did it on his own. I've tried for years to level up to 2, but I've never been near. I thought by joining you, I'd finally figure out how to do it, but this blind pipsqueak usurped my position. Naruto became fixated on something the man said. You speak as though you were born into a familia. Which was it? Naruto inquired. Moore locked his gaze on him before straightening his back and growled his name. I was at Vidar Familia. What does it mean to you? Naruto looked at him for a bit before sighing quietly and slumping backwards. Honestly, is every guy that comes out of that familia an arsehole or what? He posed more questions to himself than to anyone else.
What did you say? You were making a racket, Mr. Moore. Finn spoke quietly, and, in response to your reflections, it is because your sole goal is power. While that is okay in some cases, such as Naruto, One must have a motive for acquiring power like he does, as well as the necessary talent to achieve that level of power.
Let me explain, Mr. Moore. You have no ability, and you lack any pleasant attributes that would allow you to fit in here. You're lacking in almost every way, and one sour berry ruins the whole jam. This statement startled Moore, and some people began snickering at his humiliation.
Moreover, Finn went on, the fact that you constantly allude to Naruto's blindness in a derogatory manner is something that will never be appreciated or tolerated in this familia no matter what.
But he is deaf. How does he fight when he can't see?
Were you blind during my spar with him? He was the only one who managed to draw blood from me with his creativity out of all of you who came yesterday for the tryouts. And how can you expect me to trust a man who abandons his own familia in search of greater power? What assurance do you have that you would not do the same to us? Quote. Come on, Moore, I had everything you didn't, and I was seen to be the superior fit for this post. It's just the way things are in real life. You took a chance and lost. You are helpless and have nowhere to go on your own volition. Naruto stated, I'm going to win this. And I believe you have nothing else to say because all you were saying was nonsense to begin with.
Naruto turned around and faced his teammates once more. Moore stood there dumbfounded. As he spoke with the familia captain, his rage had gradually faded, leaving him with despair and confusion. But being addressed by the child in question and then being switched back on brought back all the wrath. In his inebriated wrath, he charged at the youngster. As the rest of the familia tightened to protect Naruto, Mamma Mia was prepared to yell again. Ice rushed in between the two to protect Naruto, her fist clenched and her emotionless face drawn tight in rage, ready to fight. But Moore froze in midair and gripped his throat with both hands, coughing. His body was slowly hoisted up in the air of the floor, suspending him as his legs struggled and his hands clawed at an invisible hold around his throat. Naruto rose to his feet and turned around, his palm clasped in a tiny clutching motion. He snapped his tongue at the pitiful sight of Moore staring back at him in dread, since it was evident Naruto was the cause of this occurrence. Naruto let out a sigh. And this is why I've never been a fan of alcohol. It robs a man of his reason and causes him to act rashly. He shook his head before turning to face the man. A word of caution, Mr. Moore. Don't choke on your ambitions. It has the potential to kill you. Naruto tightened his grasp on the man's throat, causing him to cough out some saliva before making a broad sweeping move with his arm. Moore flew out the doors and collided with a cart across the street. The customers looked at the child with trepidation. Naruto ignored them and sat to await his command. A little bit harsh that was, don't you think, lad? Gareth inquired, sipping from a mug presented to him. Nope. He deserved it wholeheartedly. Naruto responded by picking at a loose nail. Reveria noticed him doing this and gently slapped his hands downwards. Naruto gazed up at her, shocked and enraged. Why? Bad manners, she stated firmly. Naruto simply huffed and turned away. There were a few snickers around him as he received the mother treatment from her. A bowl of soup was eventually placed in front of him. Or rather, he was pushed down, which gave him a jolt since thread signaled a threat too great for him to bear. He followed the enormous arm up to the extraordinarily large dwarf woman, giving him a sharper scowl than Reveria had. I don't like it when there's fighting at my tavern, young fellow. I also don't like being motioned at as if you were older or in a higher position of authority, she said, her voice heavy. Naruto slightly bent his head. I apologize, Miss Mia. I just thought I could handle things in such a way that he wouldn't bother me again. I apologize for taking the initiative and not following the tavern regulations. He said this truly.
A part of him despised the fact that he had to submit to this character, but there was a valid reason for it. He didn't want to be barred from this legendary location, and he was also up against a previous level 6 adventurer and captain of the Freya Familia. Anyone who had to be the captain of that rabble couldn't possibly be a typical adventurer of their level.
Mia looked at him a little longer before smiling and lightly patting his head. Partially to demonstrate her acceptance of his remorse, and partially to reinforce her message as he felt his head pounded into his body like a nail. Don't worry, youngster. I think we all had boiling blood at that age. Simply don't do it again. She then looked at him and grabbed his arm. Naruto instinctively sought to free his arm from her clutches, but he couldn't even move. Even his arm remained motionless in her grasp. The power of a level 6 dawned on him when he realized how far he still had to travel, even with all his privileges. A retired first-class adventurer could pin him like this and render him immobile, indicating how far he needed to progress before confronting someone like this. Mia touched his arm lightly before squeezing a little patch of skin. A kid your age should be a little fatter than this. Can you tell me what you eat? I don't eat much, Miss Mia. Only greens and meat for me. Not much else, he replied while rubbing a sore place on his arm. Mia made a loud tut.
That will not do. Even if you are an adventurer, your children will need to eat a lot in order to grow big and strong. I know. I'll make you something special as a thank you. She smiled at him. She then leaned in closer to him. You do realize that someone as small as you desperately needs some food, don't you? I'm just pitching in.
A wise businessman. Naruto growled to himself but nodded. He got a thumbs up from her. Back in a jiffy. She said this while swinging around and marching towards the kitchen to yell whatever she'd picked for me. Finn started laughing as he sipped his beer. What? Naruto inquired. It appears Mia likes you, kid. You can tell you're going to go far just by that. Gareth responded. How? You'll see. Someone coughed gently next to Naruto, and he noticed Seer standing next him. It was nice to meet you, Mr. Naruto. She said this while extending out her hand. I hope you come around more regularly to eat. I'll personally serve you. Sure thing, he said, re-grasping her hand. He focused on the texture of her palms this time. He was surprised to discover that instead of being soft, they were firmer and rougher than a normal girl's. Although neither as calloused as an adventurer's or as thick as a man's skin, these hands had clearly seen action. A goddess who isn't hesitant to take matters into her own hands when necessary. He reflected as he gazed at the smiling deity disguised as a little girl. I mean, she's also a death and war god. I'm sure she's gotten her hands dirty at least once. SYR. Mia yelled from behind the counter. Resume your work. What did I say about talking with customers? Of course, Mama Mia, right away, Seer remarked as she dashed away. Naruto selected that opportunity to eat his broth because the others had already started. To his astonishment, it was tastier than he had imagined and far fresher than anything he had eaten on Earth. However, it could not compete with modern meals. Naruto lamented the fact that he would no longer be able to experiment with his normal devices or eat the foods he enjoyed in that world. But it only strengthened his will to become stronger and find a way home. After all, it was the objective, even if it was for the enjoyment of a transcendental. In general, the following day, the two children stood across from each other, their hands on their weapons and their bodies poised to draw their swords. It irritated Ice that she couldn't make eye contact with him. After all, an opponent's eyes revealed a lot about them and indicated what they were going for. She tracked him down the next morning after he promised to spar with her, going so far as to wait outside his door in her pajamas for him to get up so she could drop the question as the first thing he heard. He had no reason to refuse her, so he consented after they both had something to eat. With Loki wreaking havoc from the effects of a nasty hangover, breakfast was as uneventful as it could be.
It came out that she'd had more than her fair share of alcohol after arriving home the night before, and it was entertaining to watch Riveria scold her. Loki's attempt to play it off while softly groping the elf princess didn't help matters.
Riveria stood behind her, a vein pulsating in her forehead, her fingers frantically tapping on her magna alfs, as the goddess did papers in her office, sporting a big bump on her head. He knew Ice was preoccupied with improvement, but he had misjudged how much. He questioned that even he was this tenacious. Still, he'd had her wait another hour for the food to digest before joining her in the courtyard. They'd pondered heading to the training site, but it was already crowded with familia members. Raoul and the other novices were mostly getting training from no names that Naruto couldn't be bothered to ask or talk to, so they both opted to fight on the lovely grass in front of the mansion. Naruto noticed someone observing them from one of the windows, and after briefly recognizing the window as Finn's office using thread, he concluded that it was the captain who was interested in the outcome of this fight. Ready when you are, Ice, he summoned her attention. She nodded, then drew up a little more tensely. As predicted, she drew her blade in a flash and charged at him, slashing him in a diagonal downward cut from his left to his right. Ice drew his sword as quickly as he could, took a little step to the left, and held his weapon backwards at an angle. Ice's sword scratched over the flat of his blade, and she realized she'd used too much force in her strike since she anticipated him to block. Instead, he utilized a smart deflection to deflect her sword to the ground, turning her own momentum against her, and she found herself on her knees as the weight of her approach pulled her to her knees. The harsh tip of Excalibur was abruptly pressed against her throat, stopping her from rising. She looked up, her mouth slightly open in surprise, as she noticed an empty expression on his blindfolded face.
Point, he murmured quietly as he pulled his weapon and put it into his sheath. Despite the fact that it was a shikamazu, he'd sewed his belt in such a way that it made a tight enough loop to grip the cane. As a result, he could use the holster as a scabbard and draw the blade just like any other sword.
I didn't expect you to fall for that ice. He said this with no intention of hurting anyone. The shock was genuine. Is it possible that you don't have much experience fighting people? She shook her head, still awestruck. No, I did not. The captain has been preparing me, but I'm still not really battle ready when it comes to battling other people. Naruto nodded in agreement. After all, adventurers expected to face monsters that did not fight back like normal people. The Xenos were an exception, even if he wasn't sure if they had developed yet at this point in time. What he did know was that Ice had been a supporter for the majority of her time in Orario up until now, and that only after her recent level up a short time ago was she considered an adventurer, and she'd begun fighting like one. Of all, functioning as a supporter and fighting monsters all the time didn't leave much time for sparring, but he hadn't expected such an incompetent move from her. Perhaps the Sword Princess was not so ideal from the start. He extended his hand to her. Well, if it's any consolation, I fell for the same trick multiple times in my training, so there's nothing to be ashamed of.
Ice took his hand gratefully and rose up, nodding as she processed the information. She didn't feel the need to be embarrassed for falling for such a ruse for some reason. Could we please restart, and this time, we're fighting for the genuine.
Of course, he said, walking backwards to put some space between them. He drew his sword again and held it out, one foot slightly further back than the other. He was now in Ice's previous position, holding her sword aloft. She raced forward and slashed from the side once more. He blocked with one arm and put one arm behind his back. They traded blows repeatedly, with Ice hopping from one foot to the other while he stayed there. He was employing some easy fencing against her and realized that, despite her previous misstep, she was better than he'd thought. He was, however, left a little dissatisfied. The fencing in this world is quite rudimentary, to put it mildly. It is not as sophisticated as it was in my day, when I was a national champion. Perhaps I'm being too harsh in judging such a developing world, but she still falls short. To his amazement, Ice began to adjust and began to maneuver her way around some of his parries, creating gaps in his defenses through which she could push the point of her sword. There was nothing big for him to be concerned about, and there were only a number of close misses as he expertly drove her back. It was nevertheless a wonderful surprise. Or maybe she isn't. After all, she is Albert Waldenstein's daughter. Some of that talent must have been passed down. However, if I recall correctly, he dodged beneath one of her swings and spun around for the first time to take a swing at her back.
Her back was truly exposed, half hidden by her short hair, just as it was in canon. Or short in comparison to how he remembered her elder self to be. She quickly whirled around and locked their swords together.
If memory serves, she should be able to remember some of her father's motions and duplicate them in some way. I'd like a modest glimpse into that man's technique. Sparks flashed from their joined blades for a brief while, giving the appearance of a stalemate. Naruto pushed back at her with superior strength, causing her to fly backward slightly. She aimed her weapon at him before noting that the edge of her blade was rough, as if it had been shaved. She then caught a very tiny piece of paper-thin metal dropping off the edge of Excalibur and landing on the ground. She admired his lovely sword's keen edge, which gleamed in the sunlight. "You have a very good sword, Naruto. It caused some damage to mine," she stated. He smiled and nodded before proudly waving the weapon. "Thank you so much. It is, indeed, a unique blade. I've killed a lot of creatures with this before I got to Orario."
You were a monster hunter? She inquired, her brow furrowed slightly. He sighed and shrugged his shoulders.
"Something like that, I guess you could say. So does it have a name?" "A name?" "Yes. Every decent blade has a name, at least according to Gareth." "And what's the name of your sword then?" he inquired. "It's called Ale." His brow furrowed in comprehension. It was understandable that she didn't have desperate at this point. She was only a level 2, and he doubted the executives would invest in a weapon based on the Durandal property quite yet. "Well, if you must know, mine is called Excalibur."
Ice brow furrowed with perplexity. That's an unusual name. How come it's called that? As he peered at her over it, Naruto held the edge to eye level. Of course, she couldn't see him looking at her because he was blindfolded.
Because I use it to liberate the heads of my enemies from their shoulders. He responded. His gut twisted in cringe as soon as he uttered that. God, I hope nobody ever finds out I said it back home. That was terrible. He was thinking desperately in his head.
Ice, on the other hand, inclined her head to the side.
Could you tell me something though, Naruto? What? How did you improve so fast? You only joined us the day before yesterday, but you leveled up yesterday after only spending one night in the dungeon. How did you improve so quickly? She inquired.
Internally, he sighed as he recognized this as the identical inquiry she'd asked Belle in canon. He should have guessed she'd ask because his accomplishment was even better than that wimp's.
I'm not certain, Ice. It just kind of happened. Her face sank, but she persisted. But you have to know something. Surely you know why there has been such incredible growth, right? He rubbed the back of his hair and shook his head. I honestly don't know who Ice is. I've thought about it a lot, but I still don't know. He was telling the truth because he did have a clue but didn't know if his notion was true. Ice moaned in despair as she lowered her uplifted hand. Perhaps it was just the circumstances, he asked, as she perked up again. What do you mean? He sighed and shrugged his shoulders.
Well, being face to face with Goliath and having no way of escaping kind of forced me to fight him. Perhaps the stress of the circumstance, as well as the harm I sustained and the ways I adopted to survive, accelerated my growth. At this time, I can only assume.
On his side, this was a serious theory. He needed more strength to kill the creature, so he forced himself to do it. His gut instinct was still leaning towards his original theory. I see. She said this while she pondered his comments. I'll remember that. But it still doesn't explain how you managed to combat minotaurs. No? Of course not, you say. Those are high level 2 monsters, and even after reaching level 2, I couldn't battle them easily. Well, what monster did you fight to become level 2? I fought a black wyvern. She murmured this as her eyes hardened. I fought a wyvern as well. You did? Yep. I shoved my sword into its neck and then used lightning magic to fry his brain. But not before I sliced off his wing. I couldn't have him flying around in circles, could I? She just stared at him, dumbfounded. You really are something else, Naruto. She said this while appearing downcast. He noticed right away. Hey, what's wrong? He inquired softly. She sighed and shook her head slightly. It just took me a year to get to level 2. You only took a day, but it's evident from this spar that you're physically stronger than me. And you're faster, despite the fact that I'm attacking as quickly as I can. Her eyelids drooped little in disappointment as she glanced at him. Makes me feel like my efforts were pointless. Hey now. He chastised. The fact you were able to level up in that amount of time is a clear sign you have great potential, Ice. But you leveled up quicker than me. He shook his head and mocked. Levels aren't everything, Ice.
She stared at him, puzzled, her countenance conveying the why question.
As great as leveling up is, he continues, it's even more important that you build up as many stats as possible ahead of time because these are the things that actually count toward your overall strength. I'll bet you Valis that an adventurer with maxed stats at level 1 can beat a new level 2. I guarantee that since they are more potent than powerful. Why do you think I was irritated when Loki leveled me up without my permission? I was hoping that if my numbers would not max out, I could push them all to S rank. But now that she's done it, I'll be weaker than I could have been if I'd accumulated as many quality stats as possible, and it'll affect my overall power level. Ice nodded as realization dawned on her face. I think I understand. Of course I have my own perks as well. He muttered to himself as he examined his hand. In his palm, a speck of darkness swirled. Depending on my wishes, temporary or permanent power boosts. But at the expense of some of my willpower. And I have my doubts that a fake demon shape is identical to the real thing. Are you okay over there? Ice inquired. He returned his attention to her. No, I'm fine. Prepare yourselves now. Let's finish this, he shouted before pushing forward without warning. Excalibur smashed down on her blade, which she'd pulled up just in time, and Ice barely had time to react. Her arms buckled before giving way, forcing her to jump back. He attempted to sweep for her feet, but she leapt up and kicked him in the face while in midair. Even with his eyes closed, he anticipated her action and grasped her foot, swinging her around. She flipped in the air to land on her feet, only to have Naruto land on her again. They exchanged even heavier punches this time, and clangs echoed out through the courtyard, attracting the attention of several of the manor's residents who were watching from their windows. Some watched in awe at their familia's two prodigies, who were already earning quite a name for themselves around the town. Ice finally discovered that even with two arms, she couldn't fully defend against his one-handed strikes, which became painful. He eventually overpowered her, causing her battered weapon to fly out of her grasp and land in a bush. "And point to me again," he stated. She gave in once more. "That'll suffice for today. The captain seemed to want to speak with us."
Finn was seen heading towards them with an impressed smile on his face and holding out a piece of paper for them.
"In general, that was an impressive fight, you two," Finn commented as he finally arrived, "and it would seem that Naruto has the upper hand over you in terms of combat." Ice moved her feet while holding her fingers together. "Captain, I've been training hard, but I'm not sure why I'm not getting better."
"That's actually pretty simple," Finn remarked this while slightly folding his arms. "You approach every fight as if it were a battle with a monster. Monsters think and act quite differently from humans. This would normally overwhelm a normal person, but someone like Naruto here, who is well versed in the sword arts, can overcome it."
Ice nodded, a little glumly. Finn gave her a friendly smile. "But don't get too worked up over it. As you fight more, you adapt. You will, without a doubt, overcome that obstacle with time and perseverance and become a formidable explorer. I have great confidence in both of you." "Thank you, Captain," Naruto stated. "Now, is there something particular you wanted to speak to us about?" "Yes, there is." Finn spread his arms and held the slip of paper out. "I want you two to go out and get these things for us. Naruto, I also want you to go to the guild and trade your monster stuff for Valis. After that, head to Babel and outfit yourself with adequate equipment." Finn then motioned behind him. "And while you're there, I want you to also drop off some of our equipment at the Hephaestus smithies for servicing." Two people emerged from behind the palm, pushing a cart laden with weapons of superior quality. As they got closer to the three, they were both instantly recognizable. "Are Raoul and Aki coming with us too?" Naruto inquired. "They are, indeed. I believe the job will be completed more quickly with all four of you working together." "So we're just doing your errands and groceries, is that all?" Finn gave them a mocking smile. "Become qualified enough to join the executive group, and you won't have to do menial tasks like this. We've all been there at some point." "What's the requirement to join the executive group?" Naruto inquired, despite the fact that he already knew the answer. "You have to become a first-class adventurer." Ice spoke forward in place of Finn. "So about level 5. "That's it, huh?" Naruto said, a little distractedly. Finn shook his head in displeasure. "Try not to dismiss it as a trivial matter, Naruto. It is not easy to reach level 5. Consider how long it took me." "I wasn't trying to seem arrogant, Commander. I was taken aback by how simple it sounded." Finn shrugged and lifted one hand. "Of course, it's not that easy. It also relies on how you act in the dungeon and how you tackle specific events, not to mention your maturity. It is not enough to be powerful to join the executives." Finn nodded and placed both hands on his hips. "I'm sure you two will pull it off. Working hard will get you there before you know it. Just don't get too worked up over it." "Yes, Captain." As the other two rookies eventually managed to drag the enormous cart around to them, they both responded. Raoul, in particular, was blowing up with redness in his cheeks. However, Aki did not appear to be overheated. However, judging by the wicked glint in her eye, Naruto surmised that it was not owing to her superior strength, but rather to a disproportion on her end of the task that shifted the majority of the effort upon Raoul.
He had a horrible feeling. "Hello, you two, are you ready to go?" Finn inquired.
"Yes, sir." Raoul responded exhaustedly, while Aki simply nodded. "Then off you go, all of you. I need you back by nightfall," Finn stated as he took a step away from them. "Hey Naruto," Raoul stated. "Mind helping us out here?" He motioned to the trolley. Naruto shook his head, a mischievous smile on his face. "Nope." "Eh? Why?" Raoul exclaimed in surprise. Naruto cocked his head and smiled even more. "A higher-leveled's prerogative. We get to delegate the grunt labor to the lower echelons." "That's not fair." Aki sighed. "You are the last person that should be complaining." Naruto yelled at her. Besides, just ask the captain. The two level 1s were desperate to see Finn. He sighed and shrugged his shoulders, apparently supporting Naruto's point. They both groaned as they collapsed over the huge handle. By the way, Aki, Naruto stated, his tone becoming much more solemn. The cat girl immediately came to attention. Yes, Naruto, she exclaimed. When dragging the cart, you should pull your weight properly. Otherwise, I'll set fire to your tail once more. Naruto made a threat with his finger, and a small flame sparked to life. Aki backed up, flailing her arms in front of her, shrieking silently in horror and furiously nodding. Raoul only shivered and clenched his fists.
As it turned out, the cat girl was a trickster who had tried to frighten him by slipping a slug under Naruto's bedsheet after they'd returned home from the hostess the night before. Luckily, he'd discovered it crawling around under the covers with thread. An interrogation of Raoul, an early suspect, revealed that it was Aki who had done it, albeit he wouldn't give his identity right away. Naruto swiftly demonstrated his disdain for pranks by stuffing the slug down Raoul's underwear before giving him a severe wedgie. The ordeal had traumatized the youngster.
Naruto then discovered the culprit lurking a little farther up the corridor, waiting to watch the outcome of her joke, but he was too swift for him. He'd hurled a fireball at her, and to her credit, she'd managed to avoid it most of the time, as the magical missile just scraped the end of her tail.
The problem was that the tail had caught fire and she'd been running around the mansion with it, leaving streams of fire in the air that luckily didn't burn anything else. She'd eventually extinguished it by bursting into the baths and hurling herself into Riveria's tub while she was using it.
Needless to say, the High Elfess was enraged, but she was too caught up in her shame and perplexity to say anything, and Naruto had fallen asleep by that point. The fur had grown back thanks to a healing spell, but Aki had also learnt that pranking the blind youngster was not a good idea. Alright, let's go. Please hurry. Naruto growled, and the two dragged the wagon forward while he and Ice waited by, allowing them to pass and be ahead. Ice nodded before turning and following them. However, just as Naruto was ready to begin walking, Finn tugged on his sleeve. Huh? What is Finn? Naruto inquired, perplexed. Finn drew him close and made him bend down so the Palom could whisper. Listen, Naruto, it's very evident that you're the strongest of the four of you, correct? I think that's correct. Why? Because of that, I'm charging you with these specific instructions. Are you aware of Evilus roaming around?
Yes, I am. Finn drew in closer. Well, the chances are slim, but they've recently been targeting lower-leveled adventurers in order to nip at the larger familias. Now, as I previously stated, the chances of a confrontation are slim, but if one does occur, I want you to go. Leave the goods behind and make a break for it.
Naruto gave him a worried glance. But what if we can't? Then I expect you to take responsibility and fight them off. There aren't many members of that group who wander around in the streets beyond level 3, so you should be able to wipe them clean. But if the opponent is too strong and you can't escape, I want you, Naruto, to hold them off while the others rush to get us. We'll do our best to assist as soon as possible. Naruto looked at him, slightly astonished. Finn sighed in agreement. I know it appears that I am disregarding your life, Naruto, but it is our responsibility as the stronger adventurers to hold off any threats so that our weaker members can escape with their lives. Just as an older sibling would for their younger siblings. With the exception of replacing siblings with familia members in age with power levels. I'm surprised you're so confident in me especially. You defeated Goliath, which Ice is incapable of doing. But keep in mind that fighting should only be used as a last resort. I'd rather see you get away safely first. Understand? Certainly, Captain. I'll do what you say. Naruto sat up upright and glanced down at the Palom. They are orders after all. Good. Finn nodded in agreement before staring up at him with interest. Huh? Did you happen to grow taller?
What do you mean? Finn cradled his chin between his thumb and index finger, moving his gaze up and down.
I'm not sure, you just seem to have gained a couple of inches. Your arms appear to be more developed as well. Naruto focused his gaze more intently and found that Finn appeared to be correct. He reasoned that he'd just imagined his garments to be a little tighter than normal. And flexing his arm revealed that his bicep was little larger than usual.
However, in one night. That's unusual, he made a remark. Finn just gazed at him.
I'm wondering if it has anything to do with the level increase. After that, the fauna appears to behave strangely with him. Was the mental process of Palom. It makes no difference. Run, your friends are abandoning you. Finn motioned to the others who had already made it out of the gates. Sure. Captain, I'll see you later. Naruto returned their wave as he jogged towards them. Be back soon. Finn grinned as he watched the kids leave. It transported him back to his younger days with Reveria and Gareth, when they were both rookies. Despite the fact that they just barely knew one another, the disagreements and pranks they used to engage in reminded me of the relationships between those four. The Loki Familia captain took a long breath and looked up at the sky, praying that all four of them would live up to the expectations set on them. Needless to say, they were high, but that was the burden of the gifted. He could only hope that it would motivate them to push themselves and their familia to greater heights. It would be in the best interests of the entire city, and possibly, to some extent, the planet, in these gloomy times. Evil had no bounds, and Evilus was no exception. In general, what did the captain want to speak to you about? As Naruto got up to them and they went into the main road, Ice inquired.
Not much, just some personal requests and some things to keep an eye out for. Aside from that, our jobs remain mostly unchanged. Naruto expressed boredom.
Okay then. Ice accepted his response. However, Aki was not convinced.
Come on, Naruto, you don't think we'll trust you, do you? The cat girl inquired sarcastically.
Well, what is it you want to hear, you little Magi? That is just racist. Angrily, Aki pouted. There is no intention of racial discrimination. Cats conduct elegantly, and they carry themselves primly and proudly. They clean themselves on a regular basis and are generally calm and well behaved, Naruto stated.
He then glanced at her while holding his nose. You, on the other hand, are loud and annoying, and you haven't taken a proper bath, so you stink of sweat. And you've been extremely misbehaving. All of these are qualities of a disrespectful cat, which is why they are dubbed Moggies. I've only been here 2 days, and you've already driven me insane.
Aki sighed and agreed. Alright, that's understandable. But don't think I'll back down from what the captain told you. I'm still curious. Naruto sighed in frustration. If you must know, he's basically charged me with looking after the lot of you and to make sure you don't misbehave. But Aki and I are both 13. Raoul screamed. Naruto made a shaky motion with his head.
It makes no difference. My guy, age does not confer maturity. And you are far from mature.
What do you mean? Raoul asked angrily, insulted by the innuendo. Mind explaining the cupcake incident with Reveria last night then? Naruto did a deadpan. Raoul then ceased speaking. Besides, as the strongest member of our group, Finn has naturally given me more responsibilities. So you should probably be thankful that you don't have any extra job on your plate. What makes you so sure that you are the strongest? Raoul inquired as he dragged the cart. I know you leveled up in a day, but Ice has been a level 2 for a little longer than you have. When it comes down to it, I'm confident she can beat you. Ice returned his gaze with a shake of her head. Nope. Huh. The two cart pullers stared at each other. Ice spoke up once more. I'm not going to beat Naruto. He's far more powerful than I am. In our spar this morning, I couldn't beat him.
Are you serious? Aki took a deep breath. Wait, is that what the two of you were doing when we pulled up to you?
Yep, Naruto agreed, adding a P at the end. Ice gazed at him, her brow furrowed, and she clasped both her fists in front of her. However, Naruto, I will catch up to you. I'm not going to be left behind, she stated adamantly. Naruto laughed and patted her on the head. She was just about the same size as Finn, so the size disparity made the image appear a little ridiculous. I'm looking forward to it, Ice. If I were the only one at the top, it would be lonely, he stated it mockingly. You act really cocky, even for someone with your talent. Raoul muttered something. What guarantee do you have that you'll make it to the top? There are hundreds of adventurers out there that are stronger than us, and many of them are hostile and difficult competition. Naruto groaned as he stopped laughing. He looked down at his feet for a moment as they walked before tipping his head back and gazed up at the sky. I don't really have much a choice, he admitted gently. I have to reach the top no matter what. The rest of the party picked up on his solemn demeanor as they sensed the buried gravity underneath his impersonal comments. Ice was hurt the worst because she recognized the tone. One that mirrored hers perfectly. Hamura.
Any particular reason why? Aki stated cautiously.
Naruto returned his sight to the front of him and peered ahead of him as his hand snaked its way to the handle of Excalibur. One doesn't necessarily have to be manacled in order to be imprisoned, Naruto said menacingly. Sometimes, freedom itself can be the chain. The other three exchanged glances. That doesn't make sense. Raoul was perplexed. In fact, that is just contradictory. Such is the nature of chaos, Naruto responded. What? They all inquired at the same time. Naruto imagined question marks flying around above their heads. Perhaps one day you'll all understand. We all have responsibilities. Some people more than others. The others remained silent, unsure how to reply to anything like this. The unexpected change in attitude had caught them all off guard. Raoul decided that a change of subject would be beneficial. I'm jealous of you, you know, he addressed Naruto. With a raised eyebrow, the blindfolded lad returned his gaze.
Why's that, Nord? Because I'm going to stay in that horrible dormitory until I reach a satisfactory level. You, on the other hand, just stayed in the bunk for one night, leveled up the next day, and now you have your own bedroom. No less than next to ice. Raoul murmured the last sentence, but Naruto could still hear it.
Well, that's what happens when you impress Loki. Isn't it true that she provides you something valuable in celebration of your accomplishment? Ice. Ice? Naruto noticed her glancing out at a food booth with smoke rising from their grills and pots. The one she was looking at had a crude artwork of a potato painted on the sign. If he remembered well, Ice enjoyed potato croquettes as a snack or something. His suspicions were verified when he noticed her touching her pockets while keeping her gaze fixed on the stall. Her shoulders slumped as she realized she hadn't brought any valise. Naruto doubted that Finn would appreciate it if they spent the money Finn had left in the cart on snacks for her. They were intended for the supplies they were to bring home. For once, he slipped a hand beneath his coat and into his hammer space. He took out about 200 valise and placed it in her hand. Ice jerked her head back at him, first glancing down at the valise and then into his eyes, her own shaking and shining with trepidation. Knock yourself out. He motioned to the stall. Just make sure to come back to us quickly.
That quantity would provide her with approximately 5 to 8 fried potato chips. Ice flashed him an uncharacteristically big smile before squeezing him tightly. For the first time, the blinded edge lord was entirely silent as the girl hugged him.
As her hair slid across his nose, the lovely aroma of flowers filled his senses. She gave him one last squeeze before hopping away to get the croquettes, leaving Naruto reeling from what had just happened. It was entirely unexpected and unexpected, reportedly about giving her money to buy junk food. The other two snickered as red spots appeared on his face, unbeknownst to him. What? He yelled at them. The mighty Naruto Uzumaki, proud and unperturbed, is rendered shy and speechless at a hug from a girl. Aki giggled before leaping over the cart's handle, arms spread. Let me try as well.
A fist slammed into her face, shocking her as her tongue lolled out, sending her crashing head over heels against a light post. People passing by stared down at her, concerned, before either walking around her or stepping over her. Raoul snarled at the scene, certain that it must have hurt, before returning his gaze to Naruto, who had smoke coming from his fists. Naruto saw this and drew his hand back and flicked it around, rolling his eyes beneath his blindfold at the absurd cliché he had become prey to.
Not cool, man. Raoul stated flatly. You want some? No way, guy. I'm fine. Raoul remarked hurriedly as he raised his hands. But seriously, man, Ice doesn't just do that with anyone, let alone someone she's just met. You never know, there could be something there. I'm only 8. Naruto mumbled. Besides, I don't have time for stuff like that. You sure about that, buddy? Raoul asked, his eyebrow arched in disbelief. Naruto growled and turned away from him. But on the inside, he was thinking the same thing.
I'm only here to consolidate power so I can go home, he says. He strolled on, thinking to himself. However, surprisingly, the idea doesn't seem too horrible.
He returned his gaze to Ice, who was excitedly ordering the contents for her croquettes. The stallkeepers shook their heads, smiling as they set about fulfilling it. Who am I kidding? Naruto muttered something to himself. Ice Wallenstein was known for having the emotional capacity of a tree stump. She was said to have turned down 1,000 courtship requests. What makes me think I'm any different? He shrugged and motioned for Raoul to wheel the cart ahead with Aki, who had come around and groggily made her way back, albeit with a silly grin on her face. "We're going to the guild first," he informed them. "There I'm going to exchange my loot and then we'll head to Babel." "Aye," they replied, having ascertained that he was guiding them. Naruto acknowledged them and proceeded to the guild, his thoughts lingering on the subject until he let it go and focused on what gear he'd be wearing. He was completely unaware of the flag he'd raised. They arrived at the guild, and he had the elder two wait outside to man the cart while Ice joined him, still snacking. They looked towards the exchange booth and realized they'd have to wait in line to trade.
Irritated, Naruto joined in since the captain had instructed him to do so. According to his understanding, a percentage of the valis from such a significant harvest had to be paid into the familia coffers as part of his payment, regardless of whether he collected them all by himself. After all, it helped with their position and the taxes Loki had to pay on a daily basis.
He'd finally organized his hammer space, albeit he hadn't yet placed the stuff in his room. He hadn't exactly been given the opportunity to decorate his room, but it was something he intended to do tonight. He'd gathered all the monster booty into a large vegetable sack he'd snatched from the cook and was holding it as tightly as he could with his diminutive height. Ice shifted her gaze to the reception counter. "Do you have a guild advisor, Naruto?" she inquired of him. "No," he replied. "Why?" "Too bothersome." "However, why?" "They're a big assistance, you know. Riveria is already worried about me. I don't need another adult worrying about me." "I'm not sure that that's a nice thing to say." Naruto fixed his gaze on her. "Do you have one?" "I rest my case. Anyway, that sack of yours looks quite full," she stated. He nodded and wiggled it slightly. "Yep. My first run yielded a sizable haul. I'm sure they've done more than any other adventurer. I'm sure I'll get a lot of money for them." "Are you going to exchange the tooth as well?" Naruto paused for a bit. "No, I'm going to save it as a keepsake. Or maybe you can make something out of it. I'm not sure yet, but I definitely don't want to exchange it." Ice remarked before returning to her snacking. "Next please." A shout came from the booth. "That was quicker than I thought," Naruto said as he dragged the sack over to the booth, anxious to see the fruits of his labor. In general, the poor booth worker could only look in disbelief as the child gave her a jackbird's golden egg through the small slot. He began pulling out a slew of monster cores without even pausing to address her. From goblin cores to war shadows to hard armoreds, she recognized them all. And the sack didn't appear to be empty yet, so she had to stop him to count them. Then, realizing that there was simply too much for her to count on her own, she requested assistance from reception because she did not appear to have the mental capacity at the time to calculate the value of all these products.
She thought they were finally finished when the boy began taking out drop objects like claws, horns, wings, skins, and the like. So she had to figure out how much the guild owed him for all of these materials all over again.
They'd forced to drag him into a back office with the doll princess, who appeared quite delighted to eat on potato croquettes while watching the whole affair unravel. When it was all said and done, Naruto discovered, much to his delight, that he now had nearly 2.5 million valis in his pocket. He'd needed to use the same sack to carry the money that had just vanished into his hammer space before returning to the reception area, just in case any greedy eyes were looking his way. "Thank you very much for your service," he stated it cheerfully. "Please never come back." As her face was buried under the desk, the poor booth girl groaned. Naruto only smiled wickedly and motioned for Ice to follow him out of the room. Ice had finished her food by then and simply followed him into the waiting area. Naruto noticed a small crowd gathered around one of the notice boards, and there was a lot of talking and whispering emanating from the little huddle. He went to check what was going on, intrigued. At first look, it appeared like the notice board was filled with announcements about specific adventurers who had recently leveled up. To begin with, there weren't many. However, one image drew his attention right away. It was a pretty fine sketch of him, blindfold and all, with his name and level underneath. There was also a brief account of what he did to advance to the next level and how long it took him. It was general knowledge that in order for one's patron deity to level them up, one had to perform something spectacular. And, lo and behold, there it was, in large bold letters, how he slew giant Rex Goliath on his first day. And now that he was paying closer attention to the talk, he noticed a few angry mutterings flying around and thought it was definitely time to depart. It was pure coincidence that someone recognized him. A girl with short slate blue hair and comparable blue eyes turned around from the poster and noticed him a few feet away. She was dressed in a long blue coat and carried a sword with an exaggeratedly huge handle at her side.
Her eyes darted between him and the poster before she brightened and waved to him, her voice drawing the attention of many others.
"Hey! You're there. Are you the child in this drawing?" She said this while pointing to a piece of paper. Everyone stationed around the poster turned around when they heard her voice and saw him. The blindfold, if nothing else, complemented the drawing well. "Really, what gave it away?" Naruto stated flatly. The girl approached him and whacked his shoulder. Based on her voice and height, he would think she was between the ages of 13 and 15. She was about a foot taller than him. Almost a foot, as he'd grown an extra couple of inches in one night for some reason. "Come on. Don't be like that," she replied cheerfully as she patted the slapped shoulder. "I was just curious. It's not every day that someone manages to progress up to level 2 in a single day. It's miles better than the doll princess's record." The girl then noticed Ice behind him. "Oh, and wouldn't you know she's right here." One of the males growled angrily. "Do you mean the kid from the poster? Which one has the most horseshit on it?" Some of those around him had severe frowns on their faces, while others gritted their teeth. In turn, the girl gave them a faint glare. "Dumbass, he's already confirmed it. What's the problem with what's there?" The adventurers all looked at her. "You mean actually believe this crap?" one of them inquired. "Yeah. I do. I'm just curious as to why you can't." "But it's just complete nonsense," the first man stated, pointing to Ice. "I'm fine with her leveling up in a year. That is understandable, but for this brat to accomplish it in a single day, I tell you, it's a sack of lies. Why is it so hard to believe?" Ice inquired, her brow unexpectedly lowered as her earlier impassive demeanor faded. Naruto looked at her, irritated. "Why is it not?" The huge man spoke up. "We work our tails off for years just to get to the first level up. And then this nobody appears out of nowhere and does everything in only one visit to the dungeon. And he also kills a Tyrannosaurus Rex. You'll understand if we don't believe you." The adventurers surrounding him nodded angrily in agreement. Lady Riveria herself claimed he did it. Is it really so difficult to believe her? Ice was put to the test. The man blinked for a second before he realized what was going on. "Oh, I see. It all makes sense now." "It does?" Naruto inquired. "Yeah." The man responded. "She did fight it, didn't she? She weakened it, and you delivered the knockout blow. That is the only plausible answer. The nice excelia you gained from the kill was then enough to level you up." He finished, looking pleased with himself. The frowns of the adventurers around him vanished as they seemed to accept this explanation as well. "Nope," Naruto stated. "I did it all by myself. Riveria has nothing to do with it. She watched the combat, but I fought the beast from start to finish." The frowns returned, and the first man scowled even more as his fist clenched. "I don't know what kind of balls you got on you, kid, but it seems that the professionals might just have to teach you how the adventurer's life really is, and figure out a way to clean that lying mouth of yours, perhaps with blood," he stated solemnly. "Is that so?" Naruto spoke calmly, pushing the girl away and motioning with his hand. The man was thrown off his feet and found his neck in the hands of the youngster. He fumbled around, unable to remove himself from the little fingers gripped around his neck. Naruto yanked him down, causing him to fall onto his stomach. The tiny stature of the King of Chaos compelled the adventurer to bend his backwards as Naruto forced him to look up at him. "Let me answer your musings then." As tensions grew in the room, Naruto stated calmly. The guild was used to scuffles breaking out in the waiting room. Half of them were just curious about when the person suddenly learned to fly and why he flew into the boy's palm. "You see dude, the balls I got on me are dragon," Naruto went on. "And I'ma be dragging these balls across your face until you concede that you are just too stupid and blind to accept the facts staring you right in your fat fucking face." Everyone was taken aback by the nasty words that had come out of the mouth of a small boy. Unfortunately, the blockhead was unable to devise a method to prevent contemporary smashing in time. "Pathetic. Perhaps you simply don't have any for reference." Naruto snorted as half the audience burst out laughing at the silliness of a small lad disrespecting a grown guy in such a way. Ice merely cocked her head, perplexed, unable to comprehend what was so amusing.
The man went red and spat fiercely, bits of flame streaming from his mouth and landing on Naruto's garments. The boy's brows furrowed in irritation, and he made a move to toss the man somewhere before his arm was abruptly stopped by the blue-haired girl.
Alright. Enough flexing of your manhood. Just break it up right now. She murmured this as she yanked the man from his clutches and pushed him to his feet. Honestly, Germ. She addressed the man. Don't you think it's a bit childish to antagonize a kid like that? He just attacked me. Germ directed his finger at Naruto. However, you just threatened him. It only made tactical sense for him to take the lead, she responded. I think it's just you that's not thinking straight, Artie. Germ responded. We've all seen how you stalk about for a powerful man. I'm guessing it's this kid's supposed level up that has piqued your interest. Germ was abruptly severed as he discovered a huge blade at his neck and gulped with terror. Artie, Naruto's revealed identity for the female who started this catastrophe, peered into Germ's soul with fire in her eyes. Not yet another word, she said gently, with no hint of rage in her voice. That, for some reason, made her even more terrifying. Germ sucked. Why, yes, ma'am. Artie sheathed her sword and returned her gaze to Naruto, smiling as she indicated to the idiot who was now quivering. I apologize for this moron. He just doesn't know when to keep silent.
No problem, I guess, Naruto responded. Well, I suppose I owe you at least an introduction for causing you trouble. She stated as she placed her hand on her chest. My name is Artie Varma, and I'm from the Ganesha Familia. I'm Shakti Varma, our captain's younger sister. She said this while holding out her hand.
As Naruto pondered where he had heard this name previously, the name rung a bell in his head. His mind scoured the animation but came up empty-handed. In truth, there wasn't much on the Ganesha Familia in terms of the TV show to begin with. He then moved on to other aspects of the property, including the manga he'd read and the spin-off series. He had to dig further into the depths of his consciousness, his face visibly straining as he urgently sought to recall her. Artie was perplexed and concerned because he hadn't even taken her hand yet.
It finally hit him. And that's it, he exclaimed triumphantly. Little things were preferable to remembering anything that was slipping your mind. Memoria Libertas. Artie was killed during an attack on an Evolus base during the start of the Great Conflict. She never made an appearance in the canon series. It explained why he didn't remember her right away, like he did with many other people. His knowledge of Danmachi was not extensive, but he was convinced that he was more knowledgeable than some fools who had only watched the anime and assumed they knew everything there was to know about that realm.
To her relief, he took her hand in his and shook it. Nice to meet you then, Miss Artie. He said this while smiling at meeting this martyr. He would always have enormous regard for someone who died while protecting the weak, even if it was due to her own stupidity. Although understandable, no one would suspect a young girl of being a member of Evolus.
Just Artie is fine, she responded. I can't see the Loki Familia benefiting from lying about something like this. But tell me, did you truly level up in a single day?
With all my stats in the upper ranks, including S tier for the most major ones, he stated.
Impressive, she gave a nod. But don't get too bold, youngster. After all, you're only on level 2. She indicated herself. I'm a level 3, and there are many others who are level 5 or higher. So don't try to bite off more than you can chew, like fighting monster Rexes.
How come everyone holds that against me? I didn't have an option. It was either battle for my life and win, or be helplessly sucked down its gullet. Yes, indeed. But I have no idea what you did to end up in that predicament, she stated plainly. He smirked. Well, I'm certain I could beat you. He said it half jokingly, half confidently. Oh. She arched her brow. You want to bet on that? She tightened her hand, an excited look on her face. He returned the smile, his fist clenched. Let's go. But just as they were about to figure out how to solve this, a piercing yell attracted their attention. Artie. The girl jumped and anxiously looked towards the guild's doors. Shakti, her older sister, stood outside of them, scowling at her. Sis. Aye, zip it. I need you out here right now. We have an expedition to complete, Shakti said, folding her arms. Okay. Artie groaned and humbly looked at Naruto. I have to leave. But, you hear me? I'm going to give you a rain check. This isn't over yet. Agreed. I'm looking forward to our next meeting. Naruto addressed her. She nodded and marched out the front door.
Naruto stared at Ice and motioned for her to approach. All right, Ice, we have stuff to accomplish as well. She nodded, and they both exited the guild, leaving the audience perplexed by what had just happened and unsatisfied with the conclusion. Outside, the kids ran into the other two. Right. The first task has been completed. Onward to Babel workshops. Naruto spoke up. Please leave a remark and a review. To be continued.
That's it for this video. Thanks for listening to this video. I hope you did enjoy the video story, and if you did, like, share, and subscribe for more. And thank you all for helping support, and have a great day.